Bueno, un gusto a todos. Enrique, qué bueno verte de nuevo, otra vez transmitiendo aquí para América Latina. Vamos a tener un invitado muy especial hoy, ahí creo que es una temática que ha tenido como mucha publicidad, digamos, en el último año, ¿no, Enrique? Esto de
Ujú.
los NFTs. Entonces los invitamos porque pues es un tema muy interesante, que a veces sale también del mundo del real estate. Entonces esperamos que hayan leído el artículo y estén preparados con las preguntas. Tenemos un gran invitado que es Alexander Appelmans en el día de hoy.
Perfecto, pues vamos a dar un par de minutitos a ver si pueden ahí escribir, que me dijeron que no estaba habilitado. Me
México, sí,
parece que
aquí
ahí ya,
estamos.
ahí ya está. Desde la Ciudad de México,
Bueno, vamos a mandar un mensaje aquí.
desde Perú. Alonso, bienvenido. Muy bien, pues yo creo que si estás de acuerdo, Andrés, arrancamos. Ya son los 6 minutitos reglamentarios, ¿no?
Sí,
que
vale.
damos para arrancar. Pues bienvenidos de nuevo a LATAM Series. Como todos saben, a los que son nuevos en nuestra comunidad, eh, LATAM Series de Fibree es un espacio en donde una vez al mes nos juntamos y hablamos con los expertos internacionales de cómo se está aplicando el blockchain en real estate, no solamente en el tema financiero, sino también pues, en aplicaciones muy interesantes que hemos visto y platicado sobre el registro público, el poder hacer trazabilidad de los materiales. Y cada mes platicamos con un experto y ya estamos en nuestra series número 10. Estas series están basadas en el reporte de Fibree, en el reporte 2021, que está traducido en español, y hoy en día ya tenemos también el nuevo reporte, el reporte 2022. Estamos trabajando en la traducción a español y pues continuaremos platicando cómo viene evolucionando todo el mercado de blockchain en real estate.
Bien, como lo hemos venido comentando, ya llevamos la serie número 10. Fiverr es una organización mundial, la más grande en este momento, que lo que hace es comunicar, educar y apoyar iniciativas de blockchain en el mundo del real estate a nivel mundial. Y esta iniciativa que tenemos hoy con Enrique es precisamente para que en América Latina, la comunidad hispana, en los Estados Unidos y en Canadá, tenga un mejor conocimiento de lo que está pasando con este tipo de tecnologías y cómo la industria lo está adoptando. Ese es el rol de Fibree y por eso estamos haciendo en este momento este tipo de transmisión.
Muy bien, pues como lo comentaba Andrés, al principio estamos muy contentos de tener a Alexander aquí con nosotros. Ahorita lo vamos a dejar que se presente y vamos a hablar de este pues sonado y pues yo creo que ha sido lo más famoso de blockchain en real estate, los NFTs. Y vamos a cambiar a inglés, ¿no? So, Alexander, welcome very much. Welcome and thank you very much for being here with us with the LATAM community. We were just before you present yourself. This is a real hot like theme because it's the NFTs had been booming in the last couple of years, and everybody's asking how the NFTs can keep changing the real estate industry. So it's a pleasure to have you here today with us.
Thank you very much. I did my best to try and understand something of the Spanish, and lucky I heard the introduction of Fibree a few times, so I could follow a little bit. I will try to share my screen if that works.
Yes.
Let's first try that. So that
There you
should
go.
be the screen. Perfect. And then I'm happy to introduce myself briefly. So I am Alexander Appelmans. I am based in Belgium and London. calling from London at the moment. I've been with Fibree for a few years now, since somewhere early 2018. I work in the academic board for Fibree as one of the members there, and my research specifically is focused on the digitalization of real estate transactions. In this context, I've been working a lot around blockchain, working a lot around tokenization, and all types of new technology. I'm also looking at the use cases of artificial intelligence, virtual reality, the metaverse, as we will mention today as well. But just as a bit of a warning, my background is in law. So I'm definitely not a technology specialist, and I know people who are, so I can always refer people with very specific technical questions to those people. But my personal background is in law, so I'm mainly looking at the legal barriers of applying these new technologies into real estate and real estate transactions in particular. And so I was asked by you guys today to speak about NFTs in particular, and that's because of the, I guess because of the report and the article I wrote in the report, Fibree report, on the use cases of NFTs. And the thing is it's with, I guess, anything in life, there are as many opinions as there are experts. So also with NFTs, it's very difficult to actually define what are we talking about, what are the potential use cases. Everybody has a different opinion about it, and there are so many experts in the field. So I'm not claiming as a warning that I am an expert, but I've been looking at this for a while before even NFTs were that much of a hot topic as you described, Enrique, today. So I personally, and that will be the backbone of my talk today, of the roughly 20 minutes I'm going to take you through these three use cases. I see three particular use cases. One has to do with fractional ownership, what typically is called tokenization, and there are obviously fungible tokens and also non-fungible tokens, and I believe both can be used to achieve tokenization and that fractional ownership. A second one has to do with digital twins and data platforms. And then the last one is what could be referred to as digital land, the metaverse, or using real estate as a collectible in a virtual world. I will go into detail on all three of these, but I believe there are definitely other use cases as well, but I will focus on those three, and I'll have a good reason for that, and that will be explained a little bit later. But maybe, and I'm not sure what the level of people listening is. Have they heard about tokenization before? Have they ever discussed it before? So let me see if I'm still sharing, because I just got a message that I'm not sharing anymore. Yeah, there we are.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, you can see the next slide, which says tokenization. Perfect. So what does it mean, tokenization? It's used in various contexts, and that is often a confusing thing, because people use it for a lot of different things. A lot of different contents is captured under that tokenization definition. But I generally, when you read something like Wikipedia, which I've done in the past just to check how they refer to tokenization, is basically a token means referring to something else. It's something that refers, it points to another thing. And that is also what happened within the world of crypto assets. So often, and I'm going to the next slide now, which will show you the whole overview of the crypto asset world. And often it started like that. We have crypto assets as a big asset class, and then the cryptocurrencies are obviously what is famous today. Right? That's the Bitcoin, Ethereum, all the different cryptocurrencies that everybody hears about and talks about. And then referring to all the other stuff, they started talking about tokens. And then these tokens, they started taking on different meanings. And I've made this myself, so it's a very simple graph, but it shows you that even those tokens, they can break up in various parts. So you have the utility tokens, and then you have what I would call, and it's what most people that work in this space call security tokens or investment tokens. And then those can be split in between equity tokens and debt tokens. And just to make that definition complete, we have non-fungible NFT, a non-fungible token, or fungible tokens. And they all have a similar characteristic, that is that they run on a blockchain. And these tokens help to run applications on that blockchain. So NFT stands for a non-fungible token. And non-fungible part means that they are unique. There is no other set of data like that one token. So it's a bit like if you have your own fingerprint is always unique, and that's the same with an NFT. That's one of the big breakthroughs, in fact, that blockchain as a technology achieved, is that we can create unique digital assets, unique digital files, which back in the day it used to be very simple to copy things. I still remember downloading music, copying films, and then before that just copying a Word document. So digital assets, digital files were very easy to copy. Blockchain technology makes it possible to make unique digital files, and this is where we get that intersection between the real world and the digital world, because for the first time we can connect potentially real world assets to unique tokens online. And utility tokens, and just to go a little bit further in that, they are often used for fundraisings. I'm not going to focus on utility tokens today. I want to focus mainly on those investment security tokens. So just as a general reference here, you see the difference between the cryptocurrency on the one hand and then tokens on the other. I'm not going to go into detail. People that have questions can ask them later on in the Q&A, but it's important to keep those separate. So when we're talking about NFTs, we're talking about tokens, and when we're talking about tokens, we're not talking about cryptocurrencies. So how do I see the use cases of NFTs in real estate? And I summarized it in two big use cases. One is fractionalization, the other is representation. And so in a fractional tokenization use case, what we often see, and I'm going to start with those initially, what we often see is that one big bulky asset is fractionalized in smaller assets. Again, this is nothing new. Humans have done this for many, many centuries. We have tend to always make bulky assets more liquid. And this is also what tokenization can offer. So if you look at some of the, I've gone through some of the prospectuses of tokenization startups, and they all use a very similar vocabulary. They want to democratize ownership. They want to split assets into tokens. These assets or these tokens are used to officially and legally represent the piece of real estate. They represent ownership, and these are all literal excerpts from websites and from investment memorandums. And the key things that people want to reach, or key things people want to achieve with the tokenization, is make it, one, cheap to issue, because normally if you do an IPO, for example, in the case of a REIT, where you do an IPO for a real estate vehicle, it can be a very expensive process. So using tokenization and using that decentralized process is much cheaper. What people want to do is they want to sell to a large group of investors. Often when we're talking about fractionalized real estate, we're only looking at accredited investors. With tokenization, we open up that pool much more, and we can also create a secondary market. While no, it's a lot more difficult to sell your share in a house. The idea of tokenization, and that lies behind it, is that it would be much easier to create that secondary market. And then lastly, which is on the slide as the first point, is what is obviously also possible is that you create a digital layer on top of this fractionalization. While this was often, and REITs have existed around the world, and I'm sure also in Latin America, I don't know all the legal frameworks there, but I'm sure you have a similar setup where you have a company that owns shares, and actually the next slide can show you that a little bit better. you have a company that owns shares and sells those shares to investors, and then with the money it raises, these companies buy assets, real estate assets in particular. So that can be a trust, it can be a REIT, it can be just a general real estate SPV. In Belgium, we have a particular type of company that is used to do these type of transactions. And what tokenization promises, in a way, is that it will, one, create a digital layer on top of this, which could potentially automate, for example, the flow of rental income. It could also make, for example, due diligence when you sell a house much easier, or a fraction of your house. And then lastly, and not in the least, a lot of these companies promise that they will get rid of that indirect fractionalization. They will get rid of the SPV, they will get rid of the REIT, and they'll just let investors directly invest into an asset. This is something that is also tried in the past. In Belgium in particular, that's the use case I know best. There's something as real estate certificates, which is a very interesting tool that was made in the early 70s, where investors were allowed to invest directly into a real estate asset, which, and I'm not going to go into the details today on Belgian law, but it's something very unusual, and it allowed back then in the 70s, without people speaking about tokenization, it allowed for these type of constructions. So fractionalization, the first big use case in my opinion about for NFTs. Where are we now? When startups claim that there is a direct, flexible way to invest or to have co-ownership of an asset, I think that under most property legislation globally, I haven't seen any property legislation where that is actually possible. So in all use cases that I've come across, and not only myself, but also people I've worked with at the University of Oxford have done extensive research on this, and they have never seen a case, we have never seen a case where there is not an intermediary between the investors and the real estate asset. So I believe that tokenization, and I will come back to this in the other two use cases and my conclusion, I believe tokenization is actually a placeholder term here for digitalization. It's actually a placeholder term because we're digitalizing something that already exists. And it may take a different form, it may take a different name depending on the jurisdiction we're talking about, but fractionalizing bulky assets has been done in the past, either through issuing shares in a company or through these real estate type certificates that I mentioned in Belgian law. So why does that always come back? And that's, going from the NFT to the real estate angle now. Well, it's because maybe we need a more flexible way to co-own real estate. Maybe in today's world, we want to raise funds differently than only through bank channels and mortgage-backed securities. So maybe a more flexible way of raising capital is something that people want and that they have been wanting for a long time. And that's why they invented all these different types of mechanisms to do that specifically. And tokenization is just the last reincarnation of a mechanism that already exists for many years, and actually I would say many centuries. So that's my first use case, fractionalization. I think that's probably the most famous one. It's the one that has been mentioned most. And then the second one, which is a larger use case, is representation, which I see two different angles in that one. And one is, in my opinion, a very interesting one. I would say the most interesting from the point of view of a real estate lawyer, and that is creating a digital identity for a piece of real estate. So here we have the literal physical asset, piece of real estate, and then on the other hand, we create what could be called a digital twin online. There are a few companies that are specialized in specifically this thing. I know one in particular, which is based here in London. It's called Materium, and they try to link this real world asset with a digital to win a digital representation of that real world asset. And I think in real estate, this has a lot of potential. And again, this representation would then happen through an NFT, through a token, an online unique digital file that could hold a lot of information. So it can be a digital archive, it can be an information vault. People would be able, definitely if this is decentralized, people would be able to add information to that. Could be any stakeholder, for example, in a real estate transaction. And I'm talking about real estate brokers, notaries, governmental agencies, community agencies, anybody that has relevant information, land registries obviously as well, can add that information to the NFT. And then the NFT becomes actually a repository of information. And if we combine that with other technologies, and I'm talking then, for example, about edge computing, IoT, a lot of buzzwords there, but also something which is much older is BIM, building information modeling, where basically laser scans are taken from buildings and then they create a model. All this information can go into a centralized place, which is also a protected unique file. And that would be then a very interesting use case for NFTs, because we know today that there are a lot of pain points in real estate. And I guess the key pain points, and I see that there's a lot in my own research that focuses on transactions. A key issue in real estate is information and the lack of data. We see definitely a lack of standardized data, but also just in general, a lack of data. If you look at land registries in, for example, Europe, particularly I know the cases in the Netherlands and Belgium, Germany, UK very well. Often the data in there is very, very much analog, not digital at all. If we look at the Belgian case, it often takes a month before you get an excerpt from the register. The data is scattered around. There is a very slow information flow within real estate. And definitely within real estate transactions, because at that specific point, that's when a lot of the information is required, because you get a new owner. Let's imagine then that you have a fractionalized ownership where you don't have one or two owners, but you have 100, 1,000. Then this problem will only become bigger. So we will need in the future, and that has nothing really to do with NFTs in particular. It has to do with just general real estate evolution. We will need more centralized information, and these NFTs, and I think I wrote it on the previous slide, they can be an interface between the real world asset, the bricks and mortar that we find in the world. It can be an interface between all the different government databases, all the different stakeholders in, for example, a transaction, and all of that can be combined in a single place, a single repository that stores all that information. I'm mindful of the time, so I can talk much longer about this, but if there are particular questions or examples people want, I can give that. I already mentioned the Belgian use case. But there is one more use case that I wanted to mention today, and that's this one. It's the metaverse, and the last one, because I think most people, when they hear about NFTs and they hear about real estate, they will start thinking about this. And I believe that's a problem. And I personally, on purpose, only mentioned this latest, because I think a lot of the interesting research that's been done, a lot of the interesting use cases are in a way muddled over by these very easy get rich quick schemes, where people will launch an NFT and whatever. If it's a celebrity, people will buy it for whatever reason, and there's this kind of hype and craze, but people are not really looking anymore to what is underneath there. And specifically, this example struck me as an interesting one to share with you guys today. This is an NFT of real estate. It was on the on Sandbox, which is one of the metaverses. So metaverses, again, it's a long explanation what that comes from, but it's basically the idea is that you have a digital world, virtual world. Sandbox is one of the examples, and Snoop Dogg, or a virtual version of Snoop Dogg, lives in that metaverse as well. And very recently, the house next to Snoop Dogg, his neighbor in the metaverse, that house was auctioned, and it was sold for nothing less than $458,000 US, which is even in London the price of a standard apartment. So it's a very hefty sum to pay for something which is in essence, and again, people will mention this as it's an NFT, and that's correct. It is an NFT. It is a unique digital file, but it is a collectible. It's nothing more than a collectible. It is not real estate. It is not a bricks and mortar. It's not something that has any value outside of the collectible world. And I compare it very often to baseball cards, right? Some baseball cards are very, very valuable, but they're not the baseball player. They are just a card, a representation, which is nothing more than a piece of paper. And if that is scarce enough, there's a lot of scarcity and there's a lot interest in it. So apparently a lot of people wanted to be Snoop Dogg's neighbor in the metaverse. Then there is value in it, and I don't deny that. But what I say, and that's the conclusion I want to make today, is that there are a lot of advantages in using non-fungible tokens, also fungible tokens, but I guess most use cases will be the non-fungible ones. A lot of use cases. I'm thinking about life cycle management of real estate. For example, making NFTs of materials that go into buildings, so you can keep track of what is placed where it comes from, transparent supply chains, centralization of information, and get basically a digital infrastructure in a world which is very much analog, which is the real estate world still today. All of that are immensely cool use cases. They would improve how we use and how we see real estate for the future. But a lot of it is unfortunately drowning in a world of metaverse and NFTs, which are sold for very high prices, and actually a world of collectors and collectibles. So what is my intermediate conclusion? Because also I want to highlight this is in full evolution. What I'm saying today might be long gone history by tomorrow. So what is my intermediate conclusion? For me, the two interesting use cases are, on the one hand, fractionalized ownership. That has been going on for a while. People have been talking about this for a while. There are a lot of use cases around the world, and it's a very interesting topic. But I believe that the key issue there is not the technical side of it, but the key issue is the legal side of it. There are currently no property law frameworks around the world which allow for this type of ownership. So people have been trying it in the past, and now they put the name tokenization on it, but it's a much older problem. So I think the issue lies within the law and changing the law rather than in tokenization and the technical possibilities, because it is already possible. It's just legally not possible. Then the representation of a title and the representation of a real life asset in a digital interface, that's for me a very important, and I believe perhaps in the future the most important use case we can see with NFTs, where these NFTs become a digital representation of your house, and that can look very nice, but it can also be quite boring and just a collection of data. But it's very useful for people that need that data on a day-to-day basis. And then lastly, but I would say not least, is obviously the digital land and the idea of having these collectible pieces of land around the world. And then by the world, I mean the digital world. So you have the metaverse examples like Decentraland, Sandbox, and there are a few more gaming environments where you can buy pieces of land, which are today, if you look at Decentraland, another small statistic, you look at Decentraland, the ground there is more valuable than agricultural land in the UK, so per square meter, which is actually quite a mind-boggling statistic, knowing that we still live from what comes from agricultural fields, and we don't really live from what what has been done on the metaverse. So I believe tokenization, that's really my conclusion, is a placeholder term for other evolutions. We see digitalization, modernization, and that creating of that digital interface between our real brick and mortar assets and a digital component that is still to be developed over the next few years. So I leave it at that today. I've tried to summarize as best as possible how I see this evolution and how I see these use cases. And obviously, Enrique, Andrés, I'm open for any questions you might have or anybody else might have. I'll perhaps stop my sharing as well. There we go.
Alexander, that was a really very interesting description and explanation of the NFT. I would like to say that I think we are the first time we have a lawyer as a guest, right, Enrique?
Yeah.
And how do you see, because you were explaining that all these things are no new, there's a past before on this, and how do you see the evolution from the legal perspective? If we take Europe, we might have at least 28 different regulations on real estate, which is a mess. And if we have 220 countries, how do you see on the legal side, what will be the first steps, and who is going to get value first from this new innovation on NFTs, please?
Yes, this is a very good question, because if you take a step back and leave it at NFTs, but just go into technology and real estate, just generally whatever technology we're talking about, it's a very interesting thing as a lawyer to see, because you have real estate, which is quintessentially local. It can't be more local than real estate, because it's literally where it is. And because of that, also all legislations, as you said, around the world are very, very local. They're very idiosyncratic. Look at the real estate transaction. So I come from Belgium, a small country. Within those 28, 27 now, if you're taking the union, within those, there's 4 different transaction systems within Belgium alone. And that's because it's just, depending on where the piece of real estate is, there is a historically different way of organizing it. And if you bring that reality of a very fragmentalized legal landscape, and that's just one country, but as you said, look at the whole European Union, look at every type of legislation that has to do with real estate, what we will see is that it's very fragmentalized. If we look at technology, on the other hand, it's a global thing, right? AI is the same in Latin America as it is in Australia, as it is in India. That doesn't change. So you have that conflict there between technology on the one hand, which is a global phenomenon, which can't be stopped at borders. It technically can, but it doesn't. It's the same everywhere. And then there's legislation which is not. There's a clear imbalance there. So it's a very good question, because as all good questions, I don't really know the answer to it. But I believe that one key driver within a unification, a modernization of law will be technology, because countries won't be able to say, well, this problem stops at my border. No, it doesn't. It's the same with privacy issues. It's the same with everything that we've seen around social media and social media legislation. It's something that has to be it has to be regulated on a more supranational level. Within Europe, as you said, we have obviously the European Union, and as a European lawyer, I would say, well, I believe on that level that legislation is important, and it can unify, it can codify our legislation, at least for those 27 member states. But that doesn't solve the problem for Latin America. It doesn't solve the problem for Asia. So I think that there will always be a clash, and I compare it often with taxation, and I'm going to explain why. What happens in taxation is the same problem, right? You want to tax and you're only allowed to tax your own citizens. So what happens is that people go to the jurisdictions with the least resistance. People go to the British Virgin Isles, people go to Malta in Europe. It used to be also Luxembourg in Europe. People go to these places because there the legislation is more flexible. And I believe we will see something similar in this case, where those countries that have a good legislation, that have a good structure, flexible, progressive, they will probably be the first ones to have companies sitting there. We see this already in Switzerland with Zook, where they develop these new technologies, and these, as I said, can be reached from everywhere in the world. So it will be that balance between real estate, which is quintessentially local and very, very specific to an area, and the legislation to it is even more specific, and then these technologies which are global and can be accessed from anywhere in the world. And to answer on your last question, who will benefit from this first? Well, I believe the lawyers, because they will have to, whatever you do, you will have to have a legal framework, and that's something that's often believed in the crypto world, is that, well, we will develop something which is outside of the law, but that does not exist. Nothing is outside of the law. It's not because it's not specifically regulated that the law can't regulate it, and it's not. And when you get a world, for example, in crypto, we see this a lot, where people, there's just a lack of consumer protection. I'm not saying that the person that bought Snoop Dogg's neighboring house was swindled into buying it, but you could ask questions if these people need to be protected, against themselves to a certain level. And there have been a lot of cases where I've seen situations where I thought, well, maybe a little bit more consumer protection would have been helpful for these people at this point. So that's how I see. But your question is very good, because I don't see an immediate answer to it.
Thank you, Alexander.
Pleasure.
Enrique, do you have other comments? Or?
Yes, and thank you. I'm having here some troubles with my internet. I don't know what. Again, we're talking about NFTs technology, and now we have some trouble. But congratulations on the presentation, Alexander. For sure, it's I think bringing a little more of the reality of the use cases of the NFTs. It's great to hear, because a lot of in the news, and everybody has been talking about the NFTs going into real estate, but you've explained, I think, and I agree with you, that three most important cases. But talking about regulation, because I totally agree, and we've talked during the LATAM series, a lot of regulation, that technology has to be regulated so it can really be used, in multiple jurisdictions. But since real estate, the difference between taxation is like taxes are, of course you own to the government, but you can move along. But real estate, it's physically in one place. So even though you can create an SPV or something that will allow you, to go to these friendly jurisdictions, because it's going to happen. How do you see getting a more adoption from the governments, especially on the public registry, because that will be, the technology is there. It's more a political decision, because blockchain could manage the whole public registry for the whole world, but it's a matter of political decision. How do you see this evolution?
Well, I think it's again, Enrique, a good question. And in a way, I'm going to say the same as I said before. It's a good question, and it's a good question because there is not really an answer to it. But I believe, exactly as you said, it is mainly a political decision, and there is also a thing which I often call path dependency, and we see this, for example, in Africa. In Africa, where a lot of the land registries are not good or not well organized, they're often very scattered around, very spotty when it comes to the data quality, and these countries are often miles ahead to the Western countries in applying these new technologies, and that is because they have basically a tabula rasa. They have a blank sheet to start from. If you look at the Belgian land registry, for example, or the French or the German, they are centuries old. But that means yet you're dependent on how people are doing it today. So not only do you need to change the technology, which is, as you said, Enrique, very simple. We have in essence, it's very simple. We have the technology. Definitely with the amount of people working on it today and the amount of people involved in it, we can have working technology for any country in the world, I would say, within the next year. But the problem is changing the existing models. And there, on your point, I have quite a strong opinion, and let me put it that way. I think what we need to look at first is not substituting the existing systems. We need to look at complementing them, supplementing them. We need to look at what are the existing systems in countries with a good land registry, for example. And let me take that example just to keep the answer short enough. If we look at land registries, what are they not keeping track of? And for these particular things, we can use the new technologies because nobody is keeping track of them anyway at the moment. And there are a lot of things that I can think about. Let's say materials. I mentioned that as an example during my talk. No country that I know of, no land registry is keeping track of the materials that are inside of buildings. While if we move to a circular economy, if we move to sustainable real estate, we will have to know what's in those buildings. So how are we going to keep track of that? Will we do that manually by writing it on paper? I don't think so. In that context, these new technologies can be very, very, very useful. And nobody on a political level can be against that because it is actually a supplement. It's a complement of what already exists. And bit by bit, you can start taking over the current and existing procedures. And then eventually you will, have substituted the existing model from within. But I don't believe in saying, look, we have a land registry and tomorrow we're going to switch all of it to a blockchain land registry. That's not going to work, and nobody's going to want to do it because there is too much at risk. There's too much at stake. These land registries are crucial for an economy, basically, because a lot of the mortgages are registered in there. You can't risk losing that information. So we're always going to have to start with, in my opinion, I always say, first supplement, do what is not being done today, supplement the existing, then complement, do what is done today, but do it better. And then eventually you can substitute. If the technology has proven itself, then we can eventually start substituting. So it's not a binary thing. I don't think it's not like a flick of a switch. It's not like putting a light on and out. Like today we're not using blockchain and land registry, and tomorrow we will. That will not happen. That cannot happen. But a lot of people are too, I would say, maximalist when they talk about this. They always want, we're going to do our whole land registry on blockchain. No, that's not going to work. And a lot of people have said already that's not going to work. And not only lawyers, because I know we're famous for saying that it's not going to work. But also other people, technologists, have said that's not going to work. We need to build that momentum and we need to test the technology. And that is much easier by supplementing and doing things that are not being done as of today. Another very small example, in Belgium, for example, a transfer through inheritance is not registered in the land registry. So only transfers through an actual sale are registered. Well, that's a very simple example of something that can be supplemented. Well, let's use blockchain to register the transfers through inheritance. Boom, very simple. And in that way, that actually we have now found a solution for that in the new law, but I'm not going to bore you with that. But that is a simple example of how we can supplement. And that is, in a nutshell, Enrique, how I see this evolving in the future.
Great.
I think we have a huge challenge in Latin America. We have another guest from Italy, Alessandro, and we have been talking about the challenge in regions in countries like Latin America and Africa. And with Fibree, we're running now kind of MOU consultancy service for Ecuador on land register. And it's a huge problem. What I can say from Colombia, it's 80% or 70% of the land that struggles with the land register. It's a massive problem in the world.
Yep.
And I'm delighted to hear that you say that this is not the magic solution that is going to change everything and everyone is going to adopt blockchain. So that's very realistic. And that's the world we have today. There is some countries that still in the agricultural revolution, and other countries are like in another way to adopt technology. Enrique, I think we are running. Okay, Enrique is facing some technical issues. Okay, do we have more questions from the guest, from the audience? Let me check here.
I'm not looking at anyone, but the other thing that I've been and you mentioned it, quite well on the metaverse and how the NFTs will, kind of be can be another market for real estate. But how do you see like the evolution of the metaverse? Again, talking about other kind of NFTs, especially the digital art, there is a very clear use case. But when it comes to real estate, of course, we understand that you can own a piece of the land on these platforms, but how do you see the real use case, like having this twin world in the metaverse, really being able, that could also be like part of the evolution of the public registry. Maybe we can create, as the world, a metaverse that start working on this public registry on the metaverse, and once it's up and running, working, then it can complement and then substitute.
I agree, but the question there is become how much. The question there becomes how far are we going to look into the future? If we're going to look into science fiction level of the future, then I agree. I mean, it would be fantastic to put on a virtual reality glasses and sit here in a phone booth in London and walk through Mexico City. It's and I can see the houses and I can knock on the doors and I can visit you guys there. We can do as the Jedi fighters in Star Wars did their meetings live with each other. We can fantasize about it, and I don't think that the technology is that far away. But it's a very easy thing to say. People have been talking about virtual reality, for example, since the Middle Ages. I mean, it's something that has been conceptualized for a long time, and I recently read a book written in the 70s on virtual reality, just because I wanted to see how they were thinking about it back then. And actually, when you read it, it's very similar to what you read today. So these ideas, as you mentioned it now, like, look, a land registry could be the metaverse. And that it's not that far-fetched. I mean, Google has images of the whole world. We can have these, cars drive through or build world. We can add to that, more detailed plans, and there are a lot of interesting companies working on this. There's another called Matterport that make all these 3D models, very, very, very detailed 3D models of houses. It looks like you're walking in the real house. And if you combine virtual reality with the metaverse, again, what is the metaverse? That's also something that is, it's a very elusive definition. People, depending on who you ask, will give a different definition. I see it as a digital world in which we can meet, in which we could potentially show my house. I could tell you, well, look, Enrique, come and visit my house, and I invite you for tea in the metaverse, and you put on some glasses, and it feels to you as if you are in my house. But then again, and I come back to my initial point, how far are we willing to look into the future? Because today, that's not possible. And if we look at today's metaverse, it's very much just an online game. And the pieces of real estate that are sold on that, I don't call that real estate. and the question there is only, do we need to protect people, or do we let the world and the market do what it does best, and that's sorting out who are the real people and who are the fraudsters? But that will, some people will lose some money with that, but that's probably what you need in a free market world, and it's a difficult balance to strike. But I agree. In a perfect ideal world, if we can dream, we would have the land registry and a metaverse, and we can put on our Oculus and walk through it and see immediately if there is an encumbrance on the flat above you, and if there is a technical issue, and if you want to sell it, you can let people walk through it without them even being in the house. I agree on a world like that as well, but it's probably just going to take a few more decades before we're there.
Alexander, I'm wondering if we will look at NFT as a model, we basically, the input is going to be images, right? So we are taking an image into the model. From the law perspective, what will be the outcome in terms of license? I'll give you a very personal example. When I go to Vimeo and I load a video myself, I do have an option on different type of licenses because I'm loading a video. What will be the outcome from the NFT? It will be a common creative license. It will be commercial rights, limited commercial rights, personal use. I imagine that it's one way to monetize under the new law that we have to create it, right?
Yeah, and there you come into a field of law which I don't know that well, which is copyright and authors' rights, which is also quite fragmented across the world. So I think it will depend on which country you're doing this from. But if you look at it, similar to what Google has done, they took pictures of the whole world. You can take your picture off if you want to, or you can blur your image, but a lot of people have not done that. Today, technically, I can come and take a picture of your house and put it in an NFT and sell it to people. Question is only who will be willing to buy that, obviously. And then it becomes a matter, and we're talking about the real world here, so anything that anybody can see is always free. It's a matter when, for example, we're talking about the inside of your house, or we're talking about specific architecture or things that can be licensed. It's a difficult question, and I can't give you a straight answer to it because it will hugely depend on where you do it, how you do it, what is the purpose. And I guess that companies like Google and especially Google is very strong in this regard, have already been thinking about how they could potentially monetize what they have already, and they have photographed the whole world. So they could easily put that into a metaverse, for example, and then start selling off somebody else's house on that metaverse. But that's a question, and I think a lot of, as I said, you asked it earlier, Andrés, and I come back to that point. I think the people that will earn most and quickest from all of this will be lawyers.
Good. So I can, there are no other questions from the audience, and we are almost at the hour. So I think if last call for questions, guys. And if not,
people can always send me an email or through Fibree.
Sure.
Can always send an email. So I'm happy to reply to any questions. And it was a pleasure speaking for you guys.
A last quick question, because we have been talking a lot about tokenization. It's a difference in between the tokenization and the NFT, or how can you clarify that process? Because we can do tokenization without NFTs.
yes, we could technically. The only difference between it, the only difference is a fungible token is like a coin. It's like money. It's like something that it's not unique. I can I can make 1,000 tokens of my house, which are not unique, and I say, well, every token is worth 1,000th of my house, or 100, and anybody that has that token just owns 1,000 of my house, but they can't do anything else with it. That's it. If you do an NFT, you can, for example, make those 1,000 tokens unique, and that will allow potentially for some of these tokens to have more rights than other tokens. Let me give you a very brief example. Let's say you sell your house, and you and your partner both buy the 2 tokens which have access rights to the house. So with your NFT, you can open the door, and the other 998 tokens don't open the door, but they have, for example, a right to the rental income, and some of the tokens have more right to the rental income than others. And then you can become very creative, and you can look at, for example, how financial structures are built, how securitization is done, where you have different tranches of risk. You can do the similar thing with the tokens, and there you need NFTs. So there you can't work anymore with fungible tokens, or technically you could, but it would be very complicated. It would be much better to work with non-fungible tokens, which can have different, so they would be unique, just like a cryptocurrency is unique, and you would have different qualities depending on the specific token you hold. One of them, and the simplest one in the case of real estate, would be access. So only people with that specific token can access the building. But then again, that is it is in a nutshell, Andrés, the answer, I guess, to your question.
Yeah, great answer. Thank you, Alexander. Okay, I think we have 1 hour now, Enrique. We have retaining Alexander. I think we have a fantastic discussion, and thank you for clarifying the difference between tokens and NFTs.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Have a good day. It's still noon for you guys, so have a good continuation of the day, and always happy to answer any more questions that might arise through email. So good luck, and thanks for having me.